Hello everyone, and welcome back to another one of my reviews. I suppose this is becoming quite a regular series now. Who knew? Today I'm going to be talking about the newly released Street Fighter V story mode, which has been long awaited since the game's release in March. So now, finally, this may attract more people into the actual game. I'm going to come out straight away and say that I love the base game of Street Fighter, I love Street Fighter 4, and I'm straight into Street Fighter 5 as well, so slight bias there. But we will just be talking about the story mode today, not about the game itself, although maybe we'll touch on it a bit later at the end of the video. So, yeah, Street Fighter V, this is the first story that they've actually had in any of the Street Fighter games. That's a bit of a lie, actually. They've actually had arcade mode, not quite a story mode, in almost all of the Street Fighter games. In fact, I believe all of the Street Fighter games aside from 5, oddly enough. And these stories are quite bare bones. You'd have a cutscene at the start and a cutscene at the end of each game. I must admit, I don't really have too much knowledge of the early Street Fighter games. I played Street Fighter 2 quite occasionally with my siblings. Probably my main introduction to the series is Street Fighter 4 when that came out, so been playing on and off since about 2009, I'd say. And to be honest, I played Street Fighter 4 a hell of a lot when that came out in 2009, and then I really fell off it, and only really picked it up again a couple of years ago. So my experience with the Street Fighter series is by no means extensive, but yeah, it's odd all the same to see all these campaigns popping up in various fighting games. Mortal Kombat's probably the most well-known one recently. I know other fighting games have done it in the past, but not really to such a high degree as Mortal Kombat 9 did to start the sort of trend of fighting games having very in-depth story modes. And I enjoy it. I really like the idea that we can have more than the bare bones arcade mode, more than the little character stories. You can finally get to weave all these stories together. And the Street Fighter canon, I suppose, is quite rich despite all these very disparate story threads flowing around. So there's lots of things that are questionably canon in the Street Fighter lore, and lots of differing events from game to game. And we've had many supplemental materials throughout the years being released. We've had the Street Fighter movies actually. I've only seen the Van Damme one. And then we also have things like the Fudo comics, which are attempting to bring the story all together. But really, this is the first time that this has properly happened in the games themselves, to have a main campaign, a big story that brings everyone together. And I think they pulled it off for the most part. I think at this point I'm going to say, and I'll probably put it in the actual description of the video, maybe the title of the video itself, that this is going to go into major spoiler territory for the entire campaign. So if you want the entire thing ruined for you, then just keep watching. So the campaign itself, I love it. I love the fact that they can't take it seriously. It feels like a children's cartoon, pretty much, or a Saturday cartoon. It's odd. Street Fighter's always had this position where it's got a lot of goofy things going on, and then you get the occasional very serious plot thread coming up. Like masters murdering, like students murdering their masters and things like that. But they kind of pull it off in this one. They try and skirt the edge of serious, but it doesn't really work. So you can just entirely ignore the serious bits altogether. And that's not really a fault of the actual story itself. I think it's just that it's got the story has got such a backlog of lore to explore that you're going to have some of these story elements that are not quite fitting into place. The themes are all over the place, the pacing is all over the place, and yet somehow it maintains itself as a very enjoyable experience. So you start off playing as Charlie Nash, and he's pretty integral to the actual story. I think a lot of people thought he would be. He's been gone for many years, and now they've brought him back as a zombie, or zombie-ish. So one of the main plot threads of the story follows Nash, and he feels like, he's got this sort of badass factor to him. He's got all these strange abilities that he doesn't know about and no one else knows about, including this ability of his to absorb power. I guess the psycho power, Bison's psycho power, is the main thing that is going to be drawing in. So I'm glad that they worked in gameplay elements like his V skill into the actual story itself. But I've got a lot of ground to cover here, so I will get back to him towards the end of the story, because that's really where he mostly comes in. So really that serves as a functional start point of the story. Nash reawakens and he's on the hunt for Bison. That sets off one main plot line of the story, and the story does jump around a hell of a lot, which really makes sense. You've got the World Warriors, these characters that are coming from all across the world, and of course you're going to be playing on the actual Street Fighter stages from number 5, so they're all across the world as well. So the story has to try and weave around this global journey and try and make it work. But the main focus of the story, and given a clue in the actual title itself, The Shadow Falls, is the fall and death of, well, supposed death, we're not entirely sure, of M. Bison. And so the story is set up very simply. Bison tries to launch satellites around the world that will boost his power somehow. We're not entirely sure how. And they're controlled by chess pieces, these satellites. So again, you're just sort of meant to roll with it. And I do kind of enjoy it. I like the fact that they bring out these ridiculous plot lines, and they don't really pay too much attention to how the actual satellites themselves work. You try and delve into the actual powers of Street Fighter, and it gets murky as all hell. So I don't begrudge Capcom for doing that. So he launches these satellites into orbit, and they start covering up the sun in places, causing eclipses. I don't think this is how little they explain these things. I don't think that causing the eclipse gives Bison power, but it might do. He's got a very Mr. Burns plan going on. But yeah, so that's how you sort of get everything going on a global sense. You have multiple satellites in multiple locations. Everyone sees these satellites coming up in different areas of the world, and they all try to band together. That's it. That's the main story. But yeah, bringing it back, you get thrust into the shoes of Ryu, who is for some reason being taught by Dalsim, and I kind of like how Dalsim has become quite a mentor to these characters now, and he's certainly been given a power boost. He feels like this. He always was out like a wise old man, but especially now, he's definitely got the Yoda thing going on. So you get your first glimpse of Nakali in the actual story itself. So Ryu was getting trained by Dalsim, and then Nakali comes up. I really hope that you guys have actually played the actual game itself, because if you're just watching this video, then this isn't going to make any sense to you. So Nakali shows up, and Nakali's a bit of an odd one because he's been built up to be this massive threat to the universe ever since Street Fighter V was announced. And unfortunately, his story doesn't go anywhere at all. In fact, it goes worse than nowhere. He pops up and he gets defeated in pretty much every battle he's in. So he just seems like such an abject failure to get across this idea that he's this super awesome evil dude who consumes souls and is a grand threat to the world, when really he's not. He's kind of a side threat, if you could even call it that. And who knows, if there's more story content coming in the future, maybe they'll delve into him. Maybe they thought that Bison's story was a bit too cramped as it was, so they thought they'd leave Nikali for later on. I don't know, I don't really know how much further story content, if any, is incoming. So we'll just have to see about that when it comes. So I must admit that that is probably one of, if not the biggest issue with the actual story itself, is the fact that they are trying to cram in every character they can. Somehow they actually managed to cram in loads, and I really wasn't expecting it, but loads of extra characters. Things like the Bison dolls and random goons and cops and things like that. I'll get into them in a second. But the main characters themselves, they kind of jostle for place a lot, and some characters get way more screen time than they should. Some get hardly any at all. Fan favourites like Guile and Chun-Li, characters that have been with us from pretty much the beginning, are kind of sidelined in their stories, which is a bit odd because the fall of Bison is really meant to be attributed to those characters specifically. So, kind of odd there. Meanwhile, you get characters like Fang especially is the big one, where he pops up in every fight. He's everywhere at all times. And I like Fang as a character. I find him goofy and hilarious, but I really didn't like the fact that he was popping up everywhere. I kind of got a bit sick of fighting him in the end. And then Vega as well, weirdly. Vega had a lot of fights, even though he didn't really pay much, even though he didn't really give much to the overall story. He was only really, again, a side villain, though oddly somehow had more impact than Akali. But I suppose you were going to have that issue anyway. You were going to sideline some characters, no matter what you did, unless they made the story far longer than it actually is. The story itself is probably around 3 hours worth of content, maybe? On a repeat playthrough, certainly you can do it faster than that, and I'm not entirely sure why you would do a repeat playthrough. The actual fights themselves aren't too difficult unless you play on the extra difficulty mode that you unlock, and yeah, provides a challenge once you do that. But if you wanted to do things like trying to explore the story a bit, then you kind of get the impression that it's all there on the first playthrough. There isn't really much, unless there's background elements, which there may well be, that you can spot on a second viewing. But personally, I'm quite satisfied with the actual story, just playing it once. I may go back to it far down the line. But back to the characters, and I saved this for last when talking about the characters. Bison, for a story that's about his death, and about him in his fall, the Shadow Falls, he's really not got much of a screen presence, which is really weird, because he's such a... I mean, he writes himself, he's just a cartoon villain, pretty much. Anyone who's seen the Street Fighter film and seen Raul Julia hamming it up knows that he's pretty one-dimensional. So he can easily write himself, and yet for some reason he's just sort of relegated to cackling in the background occasionally, where Fang gets to have the spotlight. And again, as much as I like Fang as a character, I don't really like playing him, he's not really my style. But as a character, I find him goofy and funny. This is about Bison. The whole story is revolving around Bison. It's been the build-up for about 25 years to see this organisation fall, and it kind of feels like there needed to be a lot more to it. So, and this is going to be quite a jumbled mess while I talk about different story elements, so I do apologise. So at the very end of the story you get Bison, who is ostensibly powered up from these satellites, not quite to his full potential because you mess with them, but he's powered up. He's effectively quite powered up, and he's undefeatable until you get Nash coming in, and Nash sacrifices himself by absorbing the psycho power. He does a weird... He has a bit of a Chaozu moment. If anyone has watched Dragon Ball Z, they'll know what I mean, where he sacrifices himself and it's all for nothing. So he has all this build up and it's just, yeah, Nash is gone. Which, okay. In some way it's, yeah, okay. Kudos to Capcom for having the balls to just introduce a character, or reintroduce a character that's been beloved for many years and then just kill him off right away. But in other ways it's sort of a bit weird. You don't even get much of an explosion, he's just sort of gone. He turns into mist. And then you get the final fight with Bison, which oddly enough comes from Ryu. And Ryu has this weird place within the story. He's got his own plot thread going on where he's trying to master himself and master the dark power in him. And again, this has sort of been culminating over a number of games. And they kind of pull it off. But again, there's so much ground to cover in this story that it is a bit of a shame that they hadn't actually started with these story modes earlier on in the Street Fighter's life, in Street Fighter 4 or 3, say, because this one they have so much ground to cover that they're getting years of story in, and it's all feeling very cramped. So we get the culmination of Ryu's mastery of the Dark Hardo, and he is the main character of Street Fighter, so obviously he's going to be put into the story and have a major role in it. But his plot thread is entirely separate to the Bison plot thread for the vast majority of the story itself. It's only really at the very final fight where he goes toe-to-toe with Bison. And it is a bit of a shame because he has his own storyline and it's quite cool. It's got quite a nice combination with fighting Nikali where he masters the power and you have these very cool cutscenes where all butterflies are floating around and he's got all this mystic energy around him. I promise I'll put a video up. It sounds a lot better than what I'm saying. So he has that culmination in it. Maybe that fight should have been a bit better. Maybe not maybe, that should definitely have been a lot better. So you can have your Ryu in there, have his big culminating moments, and that's fine. But the Shadowloo storyline, it has always been about Chun-Li and Guile. And seeing that at the very end where Ryu kind of steals their glory kind of leaves a bit of a sour taste in the mouth for long-time fans. And even I was quite disappointed that Chun-Li and Guile didn't really get to finish off Bison. I was expecting some cool tag team maneuvers between them two and Nash as well, and maybe a few of the other fighters, but yeah, I guess because Ryu is the main character, you have to have him as the end fighter. Maybe, I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one. So on the note of new characters, I wasn't actually expecting Rashid to get so much airtime in the actual story. It's kind of refreshing, I suppose, to have characters like Nash and Rashid taking the almost center stage. I know that we've just talked about Ryu, who's unfortunately stolen the final act of the story, even though he does have some quite cool cutscenes, I suppose. But yeah, it's nice seeing a new main-ish character coming to the fray. So Rashid gets introduced as this kind of comedy character who also has this very serious side where he's looking for his friend, and his friend ends up getting killed by Fang in her very first scene. It's a bit odd. I think I kind of expected the friend to be another character that we knew in the actual series, but the way they present it isn't entirely clear. So it was only afterwards that I realised that that friend is meant to be the woman that has about 15 seconds of screen time, and you don't even get to see her face, you don't know her name by the end of the story. So I think there must have been some cut content there. But Rashid himself, I like him. I like the fact that he's got this I like the fact that he's got this goofiness but also determination to him. You can definitely see him as a leading character in the franchise. Though, on that note, his manservant, I'm not entirely sure of his name, but it doesn't really matter. He could have been used a lot better. He kind of just stands there and says, "Master," occasionally. And it's funny the first couple of times, but it gets a bit awkward afterwards. You get the feeling he may not actually know any other words. So I'm not entirely sure what they were going for with the manservant. I like the fact that he has his own bro, Rashid. He's not working on his own, so he has a character to play off. But maybe the comedy shouldn't rely so much on just that one joke over and over again. But hey-ho. So, for a while, people who followed the actual Street Fighter development knew that characters like Juri and Urien would actually be in the story in some capacity and playable. But I don't think anyone expected to have so many other characters, these little side characters like henchmen, and there's a policeman who's I would really love to play as. No word of a lie, I would love to see this police guy in the actual story itself and in the actual game itself. But the main antagonist, the main side antagonist, I suppose, main henchwomen, would be the dolls, who have a really strong screen presence. I was really shocked to see just how much of a presence they have. And it's really great seeing these sort of... and it's really great seeing these characters keep popping up. And there's, I don't know, about 8 or 9 of them. And they aren't all fleshed out very well. They do sort of mostly rely on Cammy's moves. And Cammy's story revolves around the dolls. So her side story is particularly with DeCapre, who I played a lot of the time in Street Fighter 4. So very familiar with the character, very glad to see her back. Hopefully this means that she will actually come back next year as one of the new characters to be released, but let's keep that in mind for the moment. But the dolls themselves, I love their variety, their designs, their quirky movesets, and again, they are mostly based on Cammy, but they have their own little quirks. One has a megaphone that stuns you, some of them have weapons, and others just come out with the craziest shit. So very cool seeing those characters in there, and especially when you're used to playing against the main playable characters in game, you get a feel for them and all their tricks and everything. So it's nice having characters and bosses or mini bosses that you don't quite know, and you don't quite know their moves. You get an idea of what their moves are going to be, but they can surprise you. So I was actually worried about the story itself, that it may just be a prolonged arcade mode, which wouldn't be too bad, but after all the hype, I suppose it would kind of be a bit of a letdown. And speaking of Juri and Urien themselves, they fit into the story quite well, actually. They didn't feel like they were just put in there to give you a preview. They did actually work them into the story quite well. Juri more so than Urien. Urien has his ties to Street Fighter 3 and that storyline going on, so he's kind of building up to the later storyline. But Juri gets to hang around with Cammy and the dolls, so that's quite cool. And yeah, you can definitely tell that they are unfinished. Weirdly, I think the release schedule was meant to be Juri and then Urien, but Urien feels a lot more finished than Juri does. Maybe we will be getting Urien a little bit sooner than we thought, which, yeah, sure, sounds good. So, otherwise there isn't really much to say about the characters themselves. From a story perspective, I could go into the characters and how they play, but I'd like to try and save that for maybe a different video, who knows. For the moment I'll stick with the story itself. And although I do like the story, and I do find it maybe not compelling, but enjoyable in a childish cartoon way, it does have its issues. on a technical level as well as a writing level. Some of the models are quite low poly. For some reason, it runs a bit worse than I was expecting for how it looks. And my PC is pretty mid-range, but it runs the main game perfectly fine on high settings. So, not entirely sure what was happening with the actual story mode. And you've got clipping issues, you've got physics issues, hair especially. Cammy's hair is just going all over the place in all of the clips. So, polishing needed to be done on the story, I'd say. It's a bit odd seeing that sort of thing in a AAA title where you've got hair flying about everywhere. But you can look past that, and if you're me, you can take videos of it and laugh at it, so it's all good. You can certainly tell that the game itself wasn't built for these kind of cutscenes. So, although you get some really cool cutscenes like Ryu mastering the Hadou and having these blue lights firing everywhere, you've got other ones where people feel a bit stiff, I suppose. A bit wooden, which is a bit of a shame, but yeah, well. On the note of Fang, I'm disappointed that he didn't die when he fell into that pit. Who knows about the doll that dragged him in there. I know that she's some fan favourites in a minor role, I suppose. But Fang himself should have died then and there. It felt like a good ending for him. But to somehow see him come back and then just have a little beat down by Chun-Li, just, I don't know, I don't think it was needed other than to pad out the actual fighting and give Chun-Li an extra fight. So pretty unneeded. I guess they could have filled in with a different character. Balrog, interestingly, could have had another fight, I suppose. But oh well. It would have been cool. It would have been cool seeing multiple characters die and just straight die in the series, because you can keep playing them. It doesn't really matter. We've got games coming after Street Fighter V set in the timeline, so you've got plenty of characters to choose from. And hey, if you bring out a new game, Street Fighter VI, and want to bring those characters back from a lore perspective, then sure, have them be revived at that point. We've done it with Nash, so I guess you could do it with Fang. So, overall, does this make the Street Fighter V experience complete? Now, personally, I've got my enjoyment out of the game more than enough already, but for the average person who would just be getting into this as a sort of casual fighting game, and I use the word casual in a non-demeaning way, certainly I was someone who was only really slightly interested in fighting games at some points. So I can certainly feel the mentality of just going in, playing arcade mode, and maybe a couple of matches online, and being done with it and being quite satisfied. So to the average person getting into Street Fighter V, I still wouldn't say it's worth a recommendation. And it pains me to say that, because I do love the game, but I don't think it offers enough content for people who aren't interested in going into match after match, whether offline or online. The things like the survival modes have their own issues, and they don't really provide the satisfying gameplay experience that you want. Mostly, I really think that they've hurt themselves by not including just arcade modes. I'm not sure what they were doing with these character stories that they have in the base game, where you've got the same sort of deal as the actual character stories in previous Street Fighters. You've got very sparse cutscenes. This time you've got maybe 3 or 4 actually, so more than the usual Street Fighter offering. Sprinkled between 3, sometimes 4 fights, sometimes 2 fights, which is a bit shocking, against very easy AI, even to people who would be picking up Street Fighter for the first time. Extremely easy brain-dead AI. So it wouldn't really be much effort to include more fights interspersed between the cutscenes. I'm not sure why they wouldn't do that, but I don't know, I'm not Capcom. But to the hardcore Street Fighter fan, I'd say that it's not going to rock your world, but it's very nice actually seeing this in a Street Fighter game, something that you haven't seen before, and something that I'd look forward to doing, something that I look forward to seeing in another Street Fighter game, maybe still in this one, maybe a story part 2, although I wouldn't really bet on it. So, yeah, overall, it's nice having it as free release as well. So I do have to put that out there, that it is something that was promised and is a completely free release, so kudos to Capcom in that regard. It's not going to rock your world, but it's definitely worth a play. It's about 3 or 4 hours tops, so you're going to have a good time, you're going to blast through it. Some of the later AI are getting pretty difficult. I know there was 1 or 2 at the end that I actually had to replay, which compared to the utter brain-dead AI in the actual story modes, yeah, quite an improvement. So I'd certainly recommend it. It's an easy recommendation. If you have Street Fighter V, go and play it. If you don't have Street Fighter V and you didn't want to pick it up until this, maybe try and go in with lowered expectations. It's not going to rock your world, but if you got the game, or if there was just a little bit that was tipping you over the edge, if you were interested in Street Fighter basically, then certainly play the story modes, enjoy it for what it is, and yeah, wait for more content. I could certainly do many videos on Street Fighter V. It's what it gets right, what it gets wrong, the character videos, and what I think of the actual characters themselves. But for the moment, I'll try and stick with the story and not ramble too much. So thank you for watching. If you do like these videos and want more of them, then please like and subscribe. But in the meantime, I'll see you next time.